And next, we learn more about what to expect at the DNC from our contributor, Mike Leon. He's the Director of Policy and Strategy at the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. Good morning, Mike. Thanks for being here. So what are Democrats looking to accomplish this week at their convention?
Hey, Kevin, good to see you first and foremost. Well, it's a big week, obviously, right? Accepting the nomination for Vice President Harris and Governor Tim Walz. But it's also a week of seeing some of the big political figures on the Democratic side. Obviously, former President Obama will be making his speech on Tuesday. Former First Lady Michelle Obama will be speaking as well. And then tonight is really what I think the first time I could remember seeing something like this is the current President of the United States speaking at the Democratic National Convention and explaining why he's passing the torch moving forward to Harris and what the future of the Democratic Party looks like. And I expect a lot of him touching on some of the Biden administration accomplishments, but you just mentioned it just a second ago. There's still the elephant in the room, and there's a bunch of elephants in the room, obviously, with respect to the new Harris-Walz administration. But the big one is outside on the streets, which is what is happening with the protests of the war in Gaza. We saw already yesterday some interruptions Sunday on the floor from some protesters. So that's going to be a theme that's going to be watched over these next 4 days as Harris-Walz not only accept the nomination, but kind of lay out their vision for what it would look like under their administration.
Okay, Mike, let's drill down into this more. A highly anticipated speech happening today by President Biden, and he's going to give that primetime address. So what are we expecting he's going to cover?
Yeah, I think he's just going to look at the last 4 years of, I think he's got to talk about, first off, why he made this shift, right? Obviously, we all saw the debate, and we all saw that he looked like he could not continue being for the next 4 years if he were to win in November. But I think he's also going to talk about the big issues, which are the economic issues that we're facing, the crisis at the border that is happening under his administration watch, the two foreign policy conflicts that we're involved in, not militarily, but financially, because when you talk to people that don't really follow geopolitics, Kevin, the biggest thing that they don't want to know is, how does this affect my pocketbook? Are we giving taxpayer dollars to these conflicts? If we are, where's the resolution in sight for this? And I think the president has to address some of those things because, let's be honest, we haven't really heard much from President Biden since he decided to step aside. I know he did something recently with Kamala Harris to announce the prescription drug price lowering. But outside of that, we haven't really seen much of him, or reporters haven't been able to talk to him much. And so I think tonight is really a pivotal moment for President Biden to kind of go out there, lay out what he did the last 4 years and why Vice President Harris is the best positioned person, in his opinion, to lead the party going forward. So I'm very interested to see what he sounds like, what he says tonight to the nation.
And expanding on what you're saying there, we can probably expect President Biden to cast this as a defense of democracy that their ticket can bring, and talk about his partnership with Harris. Also his track record, the Inflation Reduction Act, getting some of that legislation packed, the Chips and Sciences bill as well. And this convention is going to shift then at that point from Harris and how she can deliver for the middle class, and probably going to hear a lot of firsthand accounts, learning more about her so Americans can make up their minds. And, Harris's policies are pretty similar to Biden's, except just bigger, like that child tax credit, just expanding that, more incentives for first-time home buyers. So what do we expect to see in this counter-programming, though, with the Trump-Vance team?
Yeah, the Trump-Vance team has already started with the counter program. Like you mentioned, there's already they did some rallies in Pennsylvania. You can tell that both campaigns are really targeting Pennsylvania. As Vice President Harris was leaving, she was doing an event in Pittsburgh, so she was leaving to go to Chicago. Former President Trump is in Pennsylvania. J.D. Vance is doing something today in Pennsylvania with some workers there. So they're going to be targeting these states. And I know the Trump-Pence campaign during this week is going to be also doing events in Georgia, in Arizona, in Michigan. We've talked about all of these states and how they're battleground states and they could be up for grabs. We've seen some latest polling that shows Vice President Harris now has a small lead over former President Trump in some states, depending upon which polling place you look at, Kev. But I think the Trump-Vance campaign right now for this week, this is the smartest thing to do, is go talk to voters in these swing states, right? Because this is where you're going to, make your money here. You're going to win this election in November while the DNC, everyone is in Chicago. Go out there and talk to voters on the road in those battleground states.
Yeah, and the Vance will also be in Kenosha, Wisconsin on Tuesday talking about crime and his policies and how to address that, though. But there's going to be a handful of these delegates that are part of the uncommitted movement. These protest votes, towards President Biden for his handling of Gaza. How is Harris going to walk this line and balance support from people on both sides of this issue?
You know, it's a great question, Kevin, because, you know, the last episode of Can We Please Talk, I just had a foreign policy correspondent from Reuters on the program to talk about what a Harris-Walz administration would look like with these two conflicts versus what a Trump-Vance administration would look like. And the big thing he echoed to me is you would see a lot of the same carryover. Obviously, the United States is always going to stand with Israel. But I think Kamala Harris has said once upon a time that she would be in favor of a two-state solution. And the protesters that you're seeing in Chicago right now, Kevin, yeah, a two-state solution sounds great. And it's maybe a pipe dream because we've talked about it so much in the course of what to do in the Middle East with respect to Israel and Palestine. But the issue still remains of a ceasefire negotiation and the hostages. There are still remaining hostages that are in Gaza that we don't know where they are. And then there was an attack, an alleged attack, obviously, by Israel, killing Hamas's political leader in Iran. And so what would Iran do with all of this? So there is a delicate balance that needs to be struck here. And I'm very interested to see what her speech looks like. And it's kind of why I said about the elephant in the room, because the uncommitted vote was one of the biggest things we talked about during the primary calendar, and whether or not those people in November would show their displeasure with the war in Gaza by staying home. And I know that she's planning to do something. They've already said that they're meeting with the folks who are behind the uncommitted vote. And so they're going to be meeting with them in Chicago this week. So that's a small step. But now we need to see action and what comes from that. So I'm interested to see how this is all going to play out. But the uncommitted vote is one thing that's hanging over this convention's head for sure.